January 2021. A failing video game store became the center of the most insane financial war in modern history. Hedge funds were losing billions. Reddit traders were becoming millionaires overnight. And for the first time in decades, Wall Street was afraid. To understand what happened, you need to understand one thing: short selling. Here's how it works. A hedge fund borrows shares of a company from a broker. They sell those shares immediately at today's price. Then they wait. They're betting the stock will fall. When it does, they buy it back cheaper, return the shares, and pocket the difference. It's like borrowing your neighbor's car, selling it for $10,000, waiting for it to crash in value, buying it back for $5,000, giving it back, and keeping the $5,000. Elegant, ruthless, perfectly legal. But here's the thing about short selling. If the stock goes up instead of down, the losses are theoretically infinite. GameStop. If you grew up in the 2000s, you know the smell. That specific combination of plastic, carpet, and broken dreams. At its peak, GameStop had over 5,000 stores worldwide. But by 2020, the world had changed. Everything moved online: Steam, PlayStation Network, Xbox, Game Pass. You didn't need to drive to a strip mall to buy a game anymore. GameStop was a blockbuster moment waiting to happen. Revenue was collapsing, stores were closing. The stock was trading near $3. $3. Wall Street looked at GameStop and saw a corpse. The sharks smelled blood. Hedge funds like Melvin Capital and Citron Research began shorting GameStop aggressively. Not just a little, massively. By late 2020, GameStop was one of the most shorted stocks in the entire market. Short interest exceeded 140% of the available float. 140%. That means more shares had been shorted than actually existed. Hedge funds were so confident GameStop was dead that they got sloppy, greedy, arrogant. Meanwhile, on the other side of the internet, something was forming. Wall Street Bets. A subreddit with millions of members who called themselves degenerates and apes. They posted their biggest wins. They posted their most catastrophic losses. And they absolutely did not care. This wasn't your father's investment club. This was Financial Fight Club, with memes. These were day traders, students, nurses, veterans, and bored people stuck at home during a pandemic. They weren't sophisticated, but they were angry, and they were paying attention. His name was Keith Gill. He was a financial analyst from Massachusetts. On Reddit, he went by Deep Fucking Value. On YouTube and Twitch, he was Roaring Kitty. In 2019, before any of this, Keith had done something remarkable. He had quietly, methodically analyzed GameStop, and he believed the stock was fundamentally undervalued, not because it was going to save itself, but because the short sellers had overplayed their hand. He put in $53,000 of his own money, options and shares, and he posted every single update publicly, every week, for months. While almost nobody watched, word spread. Other users started doing the math. The short interest wasn't just high, it was historically, almost impossibly high. If enough people bought GameStop shares and held them, the hedge funds would be forced to buy back their positions, which would push the price up, which would force more buying, which would push the price up more. A short squeeze, a financial feedback loop that could theoretically go to infinity. The apes had found the weapon. They came from everywhere. Not millions of dollars, hundreds, 50s, whatever they had. Buy, hold, don't sell, diamond hands. The community had a word for people who sold under pressure. Paper hands, weak, pathetic. A betrayal of the cause. Because this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about something bigger. January 11th, $19. January 22nd, $65. January 26th, $147. January 27th, $347. In 3 weeks, GameStop stock had increased by over 1,700%. The kid who put in $1,000 had $18,000. Keith Gill's $53,000 investment was now worth over $30 million. $30 million. Wall Street had no idea what was hitting them. The internet had never seen anything like it. Elon Musk tweeted one word: GameStop. The stock surged again. Celebrities were posting about it. A OC was tweeting. CNBC anchors were visibly confused. And Wall Street Bet was gaining 100,000 new members every single hour. Every hour. This was no longer a stock trade. This was a cultural event. On the other side of the trade, it was a massacre. Melvin Capital, one of the most successful hedge funds in the world, was hemorrhaging money. By January 27th, they had lost 53% of their entire fund value. In 1 month, they needed an emergency bailout. Citadel in .72 injected $2.75 billion just to keep them alive. $2.75 billion to bail out a hedge fund that had bet against a video game store and lost. And then the billionaires started talking on CNBC live television. Men who had never lost a night's sleep over money were visibly rattled. Hedge fund manager Leon Cooperman went on air, voice cracking, and said, and I am not making this up, that the little guy was taking advantage of the system. The little guy taking advantage of the system. The irony was so thick you could trade it. Then came the moment that changed everything. January 28th, 2021. Robinhood, the app built on the promise of democratizing finance, whose entire brand was about giving the little guy access to Wall Street, halted buying of GameStop. You could sell, but you could not buy. The price immediately began to crash. The message was clear, even if they'd never say it out loud. The game is only fair when we're winning. The internet erupted. This wasn't frustration. This was fury. Reddit posts hit millions of upvotes within hours. Twitter was on fire. Even people who had never bought a stock in their lives understood what had just happened. The rules had been changed, mid-game, by the people who wrote the rules. Robinhood's App Store rating collapsed to 1 star almost instantly. Class action lawsuits were filed within 24 hours. Congress got involved. And for one brief, bizarre, beautiful moment, politicians from opposite ends of the spectrum agreed on something. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ted Cruz, both outraged, both demanding answers. The hearing was chaos. Keith Gill, Roaring Kitty himself, testified before Congress in his signature headband. Asked if he was a financial professional manipulating markets, he looked into the camera and said, I'm just a guy who likes the stock. The internet lost its mind. But here's what the GameStop saga actually revealed. The stock market, the sacred, efficient, rational stock market, had always had 2 sets of rules. One for institutions, one for everyone else. Hedge funds could short stocks into oblivion, coordinate strategies, and get bailed out when they lost. Retail traders who tried to play the same game got the plug pulled on them. GameStop didn't break the system. It exposed it. GameStop's stock eventually fell back to earth. Melvin Capital limped on for another year before shutting down entirely in 2022. Robinhood went public and promptly lost 80% of its value. Keith Gill disappeared from the internet for a while. The memes faded. The news cycle moved on. But something had shifted. A generation of retail investors had looked Wall Street in the eye, and Wall Street had blinked first. They'd never forget that. In the end, this was never really about GameStop. It was about power, about who gets to play and who gets to make the rules. For a few weeks in January 2021, a group of strangers on the internet, armed with memes, conviction, and diamond hands, moved markets that had been controlled by billionaires for decades. They didn't win forever, but they won. And the world watched. Maybe that's enough.